Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today, we are going to discuss Unit 7 from the textbook, Writing for Academic and Professional Success. And Unit 7 is titled as Writing for Professional Purposes, and we had already discussed reviews, book reviews, film reviews, project reviews, etc., and case studies in Part 1. So in Part 2, we would be concentrating on reports and surveys. So let's start with reports. So before getting into the definition of reports, let us see what are the advantages in writing reports from the part of students, from the perspective of students. How will a report writing help you? Now, writing reports will help students to think and analyze. It will also help them to organize and structure the material. This will also help them to provide conclusion with supporting data or supporting evidence. More than that, it will help them to write or to provide certain practical recommendations. So now let us move into the definition of a report. What is a report? A report is a writing which is meant for a specific audience where a problem is analyzed and reported in a particular structure. Now, this might look similar to a case study, but a report is very, very different from a case study. Now, as we move on, we will understand how a report can be very different from case studies. Because when you write a report, there are certain strategies that you have to follow. Because there are 13 different structural patterns that you have to go through if you are writing a technical report. So let us see what these main features are. So it begins with the title page, and you can see there are 13 elements that you have to remember. So if you can remember these 13 elements, this will really help you to write a paragraph or an essay when it comes in relation to the features of a report. So let's begin with the title page. Now in the title page, you will have to mention your name, the date, to whom it is submitted, the title of the topic, and the purpose of this report. Then comes terms of reference. Now here you would be stating why and how. Why this report is written and how this report is written. So naturally you will be discussing the methods used here. Then comes summary or abstract. Now this is actually the content where you would be explaining the aims of the report and what you have found out. Then comes table of contents. Now table of content, as you can see, whenever you open a book or a project or a thesis, you can see table of contents. So this is actually known as a content page, and please understand the pronunciation is not content, the pronunciation is content, because if you pronounce it as content, the meaning changes. It will be contentment, content, which means satisfied. So here, when you're associating it in terms of the chapter headings, you have to pronounce it as content. So here it looks at the different chapter titles and headings. Then comes introduction, where you are introducing the topic, and along with that you would be discussing the scope of the topic as well as its limitations. Then comes method. So here it would be the equipment used if it is something from a science discipline, or sometimes it would be the proceedings, the procedure or the method if it is from a humanities discipline. Then comes results. Now this is very closely connected with the investigation that you have done or the experiment that you might have conducted. Then comes discussion, where you would be stating your evidence in relation to the topic. Then comes conclusion, where you would be discussing the central issues and your findings. So sometimes some sort of recommendations or suggestions can come up here. Then comes appendice. So here it is related with charts, tables, questionnaires, etc. Now comes bibliography. Now this is a term which you have already studied in the previous unit, because bibliography is otherwise known as reference or work cited, where you would be mentioning the name of the authors and books that you had gone through. And usually this comes in an alphabetical order. Then comes acknowledgement. So this is actually acknowledging the advice, help, and assistance that you received from others. So those others could be individuals, or sometimes it can be institutions or organizations. Then comes glossary. Now glossary means you would be explaining the technical terms here, and you would be expanding the alphabets in an acronym. Now imagine if a medical student is writing a report, he or she would be using a number of medical terms which would be totally Greek and Latin for students from other disciplines. So you will be explaining these terms in the glossary part. Same is the case if an engineering student is going to write a report related to his field. So you would be explaining these technical terms. An acronym means certain terms like IRA or maybe INR, etc., where you would be expanding these alphabets. So this is what you do with the glossary part, and that is the last part. So these are the main features of a report. Now let's move on to the different types of reports. Now there are 4 types of reports, and they are recommendation report, evaluation report, feasibility report, and progress report. I'm sure all of you would be familiar with progress report. So now let's start with recommendation report. Now recommendation report in simple terms would be comparing 2 or more options, maybe projects, properties, plans, or organizations, and then you would be recommending one option. So it's as simple as a title. In a recommendation report, you would be recommending one option. So you will understand it in a better way when I give you an example. Now look at a company which is trying to buy a grammar checking software. Now, if you Google it out, you can see there would be innumerable softwares available. So the question is, which one should you buy for the company? And for that, you have to check the various options, the quality, the price, all these things. And finally, you have to recommend one option. So this is what you mean by a recommendation report. Now, the best example is given in page number 203. So I request that you should go through this recommendation report. Now, the recommendation report here is something related with buying a laptop in State Bank. So State Bank, one of the branches, would be planning to buy a laptop. So automatically, the purchase department would be entrusted with this responsibility. So the purchase department would be asked to give a recommendation report. So what will the purchase department do? They will go through a number of options, different brands, like maybe they would go through Sony laptops, Dell laptops, or maybe Apple MacBook. They go through these options and they weigh the pros and cons of all these laptops, because they would be looking at the memory capacity, they would be looking at the weight of the laptop. Some laptops would be very bulky, some others would be very sleek. They would also be looking at the battery percentage, the battery level, because this is very important when you are planning to buy a laptop or a mobile phone. They would also be looking at the storage capacity, operating system, and finally cost. So looking at all these options, which laptop gives you the maximum number of options with a lesser price? So if you look at this report, I want you to go through this report, to read this report. If you look at this report, in the concluding part, it is written that Sony laptop is the most expensive one, but Dell provides all the essential features with a lower price. And finally, the recommendation is that, considering all these factors, I would recommend Dell Latitude LM-M16. So that is the brand, that is a model number. So this is how they have come to a conclusion. So this is how you write a recommendation report. So please go through this recommendation report on page 203. You will understand it in a better way. So moving on to the next one, this is evaluation report. Now, in an evaluation report, the very same thing happens. Because you will be comparing two or more options like products, properties, plans, or organizations, but this becomes different because rather than a technical kind of one, this is more like an opinion or a judgment. So the technical part is different here. So evaluation report normally comes in something which has already been implemented. So evaluation is actually you are taking the value of something, which means you will be estimating how it works. So evaluation report is always connected with the performance part, like whether it is working properly or whether it is not working properly or whether you should go for a change. So this is how an evaluation report comes. Now there is one example that is given in your textbook in page number 206. I want you to go through this in page number 206. So here the topic is student only transport system in Calicut. So it is suggested that this kind of a student-only transport system was implemented in Calicut for college students. Now, as a part of this, when you evaluate it, it was understood that student attendance increased when this was initiated. The second thing, many boys kept their bikes at home and started traveling in this student only systems. So these were some of the advantages that they could find. Now the question is, when you write an evaluation report, whether this transport system should continue or whether you should stop this transport system or whether you should incorporate some changes within the same system. So this is how you write an evaluation report. I believe you got the difference, because in a recommendation report you are suggesting out of these options this is the best one. But in evaluation report you are actually assessing the performance, and therefore you can say you can continue, or then you can say you have to stop it, or sometimes you would be saying some modifications should be done. So this is how an evaluation report differs from a recommendation report. Then comes feasibility report. Now, feasibility report is a report which would be estimating whether something is technically, socially, economically, administratively, or environmentally possible. So in short, to make it simple, a feasibility report is a report which tells you whether something is practically possible. Now sometimes it is easy to speak about idealistic notions, but sometimes it is very difficult to put it into practicality. So feasibility report speaks about that practical part. So feasibility report is just like this: either yes, you can go ahead, or it is like no. Or maybe it's something like maybe with a few changes. So this part is very close to the previous evaluation report which we have studied. And sometimes this will be coming with recommendations or with suggestions. So I'll give you the example so that you will understand it in a better way. Collecting e-books from foreign universities. So a feasibility report can be made on this topic. Now, is it really possible to collect e-books from all foreign universities? Is it practical? Is it technically okay? If it is economically okay, which means what about the finance part? If it is administratively okay, which means you need the recognition or you need the permission of the college authorities, you need the permission of the university sometimes. So is it is administratively okay? So these are the questions that will come around this. So collecting ebooks from foreign universities. Then comes introducing a new course in college. This can also be connected with feasibility report. Now see, I'm giving you examples which are related with colleges and universities because you will understand it in a better way. So introducing a new course in college, if you talk about the practical things, you will have to see whether there are enough classrooms to accommodate these students. Secondly, you have to see whether if there is a bus system running in the college, you will have to see whether these extra students can be accommodated. So these are the practical issues when you start a new course in college, whether there would be enough teachers to teach them or whether you will have to recruit new appointments as teachers to teach them. So these are the technical things which are coming around this topic, introducing a new course in college. So a feasibility report will analyze all these things and will tell you whether it is practically possible or not. Then comes creating AI child robot. Now AI is artificial intelligence, so creating artificially intelligent child robots. Now when you look at these kind of topics, definitely you will have to think about even the ethical issues. There are lots of problems which can come in connection with this. So it's not just the economical part, there is a social thing which is coming here, whether this is acceptable. Children in child robots or robots in the form of children walking around you, walking in the streets, or whether it is socially possible, so whether it is technically possible, whether it is ethically possible. So all these questions will be considered in a feasibility report. Then comes progress report. So this is something which you already know, so I'm just moving on with this area. We'll just go through this very quickly to discuss the progress you have made. Now this can be in connection with designing a product. Even when you design a product in certain companies, you will be asked to give the progress report, like how far you have reached. Again, in construction work, for example, if an apartment is in the construction process or a building, how far you have progressed. Again, in repairing something, even in research, when people do PhDs, this progress report is an important part of this. Again, in academics, sometimes when you're doing your project, your teachers who would be guiding you will be asking you, what is the status of your project, or how far have you reached? So what is the main necessity for a progress report? Because a progress report will tell you how much of the work is complete, what part of the work is currently in progress. Now, what work remains to be done? Now, what were the problems that you faced during the first part of your work, and how it is going in general? So, these are some of the things that work with progress report. Now, I remember while I was doing my PhD, we were asked to submit progress reports every 6 months. So, when these progress reports are submitted, you would be talking about those areas which you have read, those areas which you have completed, and sometimes you would also be mentioning the difficulties that you faced. Because I did my PhD in film studies, I had difficulties in getting many books because most of the books were written and published only abroad, and it was very difficult to get these books. So this was one difficulty that I faced, and this too would be recorded in the progress report, so that some suggestions from the higher authorities, your guide or your research center, will connect with that and they will try to resolve this problem. So the problems that you faced should also be mentioned in the progress report. Now, what exactly is the relevance of progress report? Now, a progress report will reassure that your work is progressing, which means the guide or your authority might know that you are working on it, to show them what you have completed, to evaluate your work and give suggestions. So they would tell you, like, this is not the way you have to write, you have to change it, you have to modify it, you have to edit it. So you get suggestions and recommendations. And also to discuss the problems that you have faced and to create a work schedule to complete it on time. So you get a pattern, you have to complete it within this particular time. So this is like scheduling it. Now, there are different types of progress reports. Now, sometimes certain reports will be like within 3 months, sometimes it will be like 6 months, sometimes like 9 months. So different disciplines will be having it in different ways. Now, there are three types of progress reports. Now, one is a memo, then comes a letter, then comes a formal report. Now, a memo is a short and informal one which is given within the organization. Now, a letter is a short and informal one which is given outside the organization. Now, I can tell you the example quickly. Suppose I am doing some project in my department. Suppose my HOD is asking me, what is the status of this? I would be giving a memo to my HOD because that would be short and informal and it is within the organization. Now, suppose if I am in charge of some other programs like SAP or Walk with a Scholar or something like that, if the principal is asking to give the progress report which needs to be submitted at the university, again, I would be giving a letter. That would be short and informal, but this will go to the university which is outside the organization. Now, the next one is a formal report. Now, this would be long and formal, and this would go outside the organization. So, actually, the real structural, technical kind of report is a formal report. Now you can see this example in page number 210. There is a model report which is given. Now if you go through this report, you will understand it in a better way. So now we are moving on to the next part, surveys. I'm sure you are very familiar with this word, and this is a term which doesn't require any particular introduction. So surveys are ways through which direct information is gathered straight from the world. So surveys and questionnaires are almost the same kind of thing. In surveys, you directly observe and record. For example, in surveys, you go directly to the houses, you go and meet the persons, you talk to them directly, so that is a survey. But a questionnaire means you need not go to them personally. On the other side, you will be gathering the information through different channels. Now, years before, maybe 5 years, 6 years before, the trend was people would be giving you papers. They would be distributing you with papers, and there would be a number of questions in the papers. So you will have to tick the questions and then you have to return the paper. That was a method 5, 6 years before. But today, I'm sure you would be getting a number of Google forms, sometimes as teacher feedback form, sometimes from your colleges, you would be asked to fill in these forms. So this Google form, as you can see, is a different or a modern version of a questionnaire. So it's to get information from a large group. Now, there are certain things that you have to remember when you are designing questionnaires. Now, the very first thing is to limit the number of questions. And now in today's world, during the pandemic, you can see lots and lots of Google forms are coming. And many PhD candidates who are conducting their research in these data analysis kind of topics, they send a number of Google forms to collect responses from a large group of people. So the main thing that you have to remember here is that limit the number of questions, because people are really fed up with these answering questions kind of term. So if you limit the numbers like 8 questions or 10 questions, it's rather easy. And keep it clear and simple. Don't confuse the readers, make it short and brief. Another thing is that balance closed and open questions. Now, closed and open questions are always difficult. Now, I'll give you one example. You can see it here. Have you stopped smoking? Now, what answer would you give for this kind of a question? Now, imagine if you give the answer yes. Have you stopped smoking? Yes. Now, what does that mean? It means that you had the habit of smoking. That is confirmed when you're giving the answer as yes, right? On the other hand, just think. Have you stopped smoking? You're giving the answer no, which means you are still smoking. So, whether you say yes or no, you will be branded as someone who smokes. So this is a problem with closed and open questions. So never give these kind of questions, because it is a very difficult question to answer. Whether you say yes or whether you say no, you will be branded in some ways. Now again, you have to look at the questions, you have to check and modify it according to the audience. Now if you're collecting some responses from teacher community, please do not give the same kind of questions if you are collecting response from student communities, because teacher community is different, student community is different. So check the audience and then give the questions. And only relevant information should be collected. Don't ask unnecessary question which is not connected with your topic. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of questionnaires? Now, let's look at the advantages. They are more quick in nature. We all know that if you send a link in Google form, you get the response very quickly. It's very instantaneous kind of thing. So you can obtain answers from people who are out of reach. Now, this is the best part of it. Even if you want to collect some responses from people in America, you can do it. You just need to send the link and they can respond and you can collect it. And more than that, the people will get time to think. On the other hand, when you go personally to meet someone, you are asking questions directly to them. Sometimes it would be difficult for some people to answer very quickly. But when you are given a Google form or when you're given a paper to note down, it is more easier for people. So they get time to think. And sometimes tone or expression will not influence. If you're going personally and asking them questions, your expression will also be a part of influence for those who are listening to you. And finally, the cost is very low. So these are the main advantages. Now, looking at the disadvantages, this will always lean towards those who have strong opinions. Now, see, usually in questionnaires, you will have mediocre kind of responses like either yes, no, or maybe. And most of the people would go for this maybe option always. So in reality, you will not really get a correct kind of response because just a minority would be going with yes or no kind of answers. Most others would choose a maybe option. And the next disadvantage is that there is no follow up. Because if you go personally, you can again go to them personally again and you can ask them. But you don't have that option here when you're giving a Google form or when you're submitting or when you're giving them some sort of papers. The next thing is its distribution. Even if it is a Google form, you can see to distribute it is really a difficult thing. So it has to reach every corner, and that is the most difficult part. And finally, collecting answers can be difficult. Now, this is more or less easy with Google Forms, but there was a time when collecting these answers had become very difficult because you give papers and people will have to submit these papers. Now, some people will forget it somewhere, some people will not return it promptly. So these kind of disadvantages are also there with questionnaires. Now let's look at some of the examples in questionnaires like internet usage in students, patterns of spending in college students, are online classes really working, or sometimes feedback for the quality of teachers. So these are some of the examples of questionnaires. So with this we come to the end of the session, but I would continue with my request that you should read the textbook along with the examples given there, because only then you will understand how it is written. Because sometimes if you're asked to write a report, it is not just the patterns that can help you, but you should know how it has to be written. And for that, please go through the textbook. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have got any queries, if you have got any doubts, or if you need any more assistance, please do not feel hesitant to connect with me. You can connect with me in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you.